Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're your shortcut to really getting what projects are all about, how they actually work, and, well, what makes them tick.
Yeah, today we're digging into a pretty comprehensive set of project management notes. The idea is to turn all that dense info into something, clear and useful for you.
Exactly. Our mission, find those golden nuggets of knowledge, make sure you're clued in, but without that feeling of just drowning in information.
That's the plan. Our main source here is PMP certification study notes. It's solid for the basics, the terms, the concepts, but we want to go a bit deeper than just definitions today.
Absolutely. We're aiming to uncover some of the maybe surprising details and the real wisdom behind getting projects done right. If you've ever looked at a project and thought, why did that one succeed when this one didn't? Well, you're in the right spot.
Okay, let's get started then.
Right. Let's start at the very beginning. What is a project, fundamentally? The source gives us a definition.
It does. It calls it a temporary endeavor to create a unique product, service, or result.
Okay, temporary and unique. Those
Yeah.
seem like the key words there.
They really are. See, projects aren't your day-to-day stuff. That's operations managing things that are ongoing, repetitive, like, I don't know, making the same widget every day.
Right. Business as usual.
Exactly. Projects, though, they're all about driving change. They create something new, some kind of business value. And that value, it could be something you can touch, a tangible product, or it might be intangible, like improving a workflow.
So even making, say, version 2 of some software counts
Yeah.
because it's a specific change.
Precisely. It's unique compared to version 1. It's temporary. You develop it, you release it, the project ends. It moves the product to a new state. That's the core idea.
Got it. Moving from state A to state B. And these projects, they don't just happen in isolation, do they? There are things that influence them.
Oh, absolutely. The notes break these influences down into two main buckets.
Okay, what are they?
First, you've got organizational process assets, OPAs. Think of these as all the internal stuff an organization has that helps run projects.
Like templates, procedures.
Exactly. Templates for, say, a work breakdown structure, procedures for how work gets authorized, guidelines, lessons learned from past projects. Basically, the organization's collected wisdom and tools for project management, these OPAs. They're a huge input for planning any project. It's like the company's internal project playbook.
Okay, the internal playbook. Makes sense. What's the second category?
Those are the enterprise environmental factors, or EEFs. These are different. They're factors, often external, that the project team doesn't really control.
Like what?
Things like the company culture, market conditions, maybe new legal rules, the technology that's available, stuff like that. EEFs often act as constraints on the project. They kind of set the boundaries.
So internal playbook versus external constraints. Got it.
And tying this together, projects don't just appear out of thin air. They usually start because something needs to change.
Right, like a new regulation comes in.
Yeah, or stakeholders need something different, or there's new tech available, or maybe an existing product just needs fixing or improving. Projects are basically how organizations respond strategically to these kinds of drivers.
Okay, that paints a clearer picture. And once a project does get going, it usually has some kind of structure, right? Like phases.
Yep. Projects are often broken down into phases. Each phase usually wraps up with a specific deliverable. And importantly, at the end of each phase, you often have what's called a phase gate.
A phase gate, what's that exactly?
It's like a checkpoint, a crucial decision point. The team, the stakeholders, they look at the work done in that phase, check if the objectives were met, and then decide, okay, do we move on to the next phase, or do we need to change something? Or maybe even stop the project. It's a key control point.
Gonna go?
Pretty much. And it's important, like you said earlier about definitions, not to mix up these broad project phases with a process. PMI, the Project Management Institute, defines a process very specifically. It's like a recipe. Inputs, tools, and techniques, and outputs. There are 49 of those defined. Phases are bigger chunks of the project lifecycle.
Ah, okay. Process is the recipe, phase is the course in the meal. I like that. And then there's the even bigger picture, the hierarchy. Portfolio, program, project.
Exactly. That hierarchy is super important for understanding how projects actually help achieve the big strategic goals. So a project is that specific temporary endeavor we talked about.
Right.
A program is a group of related projects. You manage them together because you get benefits you wouldn't get managing them separately. Think about launching a new product line that might be a program. You'd have separate projects maybe for R&D, marketing, setting up manufacturing, all coordinated.
Okay, so coordination is key for programs.
Yeah.
And portfolio.
Portfolio is the highest level. It's a collection of projects, programs. even sometimes operational work, all managed together to meet the organization's overall strategic objectives. It's about picking the right projects and programs to invest in to maximize value for the whole organization.
And how did that coordination happen?
That's where organizational project management, or OPM, comes in. It's the framework an organization uses to coordinate all these portfolios, programs, and projects to make sure they align with the strategy and actually deliver the intended business value. It connects the strategy to the execution.
I can really see how that helps keep everything aligned from the top down.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have the landscape. Let's zoom in on project management itself. What is it beyond just, managing?
Well, the formal definition is applying knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to the project activities. The goal: meet the project requirements and ultimately satisfy the customer or stakeholders. It's about bringing structure and control to achieve that unique outcome.
There was one stat in these notes that just, really jumped out at me. It said something like 90% of a project manager's job is communication. 90%. That seems huge. What does that really tell us?
It's fundamental. Honestly, it might even be an understatement sometimes. Think about it. A PM isn't just tracking tasks on a spreadsheet. They're constantly negotiating, explaining, listening, persuading, trying to keep everyone, all the stakeholders, with their different viewpoints and priorities, pulling in the same direction.
So less taskmaster, more diplomat.
Diplomat, psychologist, translator,
Yeah.
negotiator. Yeah. Aligning expectations is a massive and often the hardest part of the job. Communication is absolutely the lifeblood. If it breaks down, the project's in trouble.
That really reframes the role. And speaking of frameworks, the notes make a point about the PMBO guide, the project management body of knowledge. It's not a rigid methodology.
No, and that's a critical distinction. It's a framework, a standard, a collection of generally recognized good practices. It's not like Agile or Scrum, which are specific methodologies telling you exactly how to work.
Why is that difference so important?
Because no two projects are identical. Trying to apply the entire PMBOK guide like a strict rulebook to every single project would be, well, inefficient at best, disastrous at worst.
So you need to adapt it.
Exactly. That's where tailoring comes in. It's the skill, the art really, of looking at your specific project, its size, complexity, risks, the environment it's in, and selecting only the processes, tools, and techniques from the framework that actually make sense and add value for this particular job. It's like having a giant toolbox. You only pick the tools you actually need.
The right tool for the job.
Yeah.
Makes sense. And every PM using these tools is constantly juggling what the notes call the competing constraints.
Yes. The classic constraints, usually listed as time, cost, scope, quality, risk, and resources. They're all interconnected. You can rarely change one without impacting at least one of the others.
The balancing act.
A constant balancing act. That's a huge part of the PM's job.
And to help manage all this, there are some key documents, right?
Definitely. Several crucial ones mentioned. The project business case, for example. That basically justifies the project's existence. Why are we doing this? What are the benefits? Is it economically feasible? It's needed for authorization.
Okay, the why. What else?
The Project Benefits Management Plan. This one describes how and when the benefits outlined in the business case will actually be delivered and measured. Keeps the focus on the value.
And the project charter. That sounds important.
Very. It formally authorizes the project to start, and crucially, it names the project manager and gives them the authority to apply resources to the project activities.
Got it. Authorization and naming the PM.
Then you have the main project management plan. This is the big one. It details how the project will be executed, monitored, controlled, and closed. It integrates all the subsidiary plans for scope, schedule, cost, quality, etc., and documents assumptions and decisions. It's the roadmap.
The master plan.
Essentially, yes. And finally, the notes mention project success measures. These define how success will actually be measured, tied back to the project objectives. What does done and successful actually look like?
Okay, those documents sound like the essential navigation tools, which brings us squarely to the project manager, the person leading this charge. What's their core function?
Fundamentally, the PM is the person assigned by the organization to lead the team that's responsible for achieving the project objectives. That's the core. And interestingly, their specific role and authority level can vary a lot depending on the organization and the project itself. It gets tailored, just like the processes.
So not just one size fits all for the PM role either, and they need a pretty broad skill set, right?
Yeah.
The source breaks it down into three main areas.
It does. First, technical project management. This is the science part. Knowing the processes, how to tailor them, manage schedules, budgets, risks, resources effectively.
Okay, the nuts and bolts.
Then, leadership. This is huge, tying back to that 90% communication figure. It includes motivating the team, building relationships, influencing stakeholders, managing conflict, negotiation, all those people skills.
The art part, maybe.
You could say that. And third, strategic and business management. This is about seeing the bigger picture, understanding the organization's goals, its strategy, its market, and making sure the project aligns with that and contributes to the business value. Keeping an eye on the forest, not just the trees.
Technical leadership and strategic. A tough combo to master. And they're the ones balancing the constraints, communicating even the bad news, which is never easy, and getting the team involved in planning.
Absolutely. Good PMs involve their teams. And yes, delivering bad news effectively is a critical skill. There's also a distinction the notes make between leadership and management.
Oh, what's the difference in this context?
Management is more about directing people do this task this way. Leadership is more about guiding, influencing, empowering. Here's the goal. How do we best get there together? A good PM needs to do both, but leadership is often what separates the great ones.
Makes sense. And the PM uses different styles for that leadership.
Yeah. The notes list a few common ones. Laissez-faire, hands-off. Transactional, reward, punishment-based. Servant leader, focus on team needs. Transformational, inspiring change. Charismatic, interactional. The best PMs adapt their style to the situation and the team.
Yeah, they're not working alone. Who makes up the typical project team?
It could be really diverse. Obviously, the PM, project management staff, the core team members doing the work, subject matter experts, SMEs, maybe reps from the customer side, sellers or suppliers, other business partners. It can be a mix of internal and external people, sometimes working together physically, sometimes virtually.
A whole ecosystem of people. And the notes mentioned something about senior management.
Right. If there's a need to change one of those really high-level constraints, like a major budget increase or a significant scope change, the PM usually needs to go to senior management for approval because those changes often have wider organizational impacts.
That links back to the organizational structure itself, doesn't it? How the company is set up must impact how projects run.
Massively. The organizational structure dictates a lot about power, authority, communication lines, resource availability.
Yeah.
It forms the ecosystem the project lives in.
So let's talk about that organizational ecosystem. What are the different structures and how do they affect the PM?
Okay. The source mentions several types. A common one is the functional organization. This is your classic structure where staff are grouped by specialty engineering, marketing, finance, etc. Each department does its project work kind of independently.
And then the PM in that setup.
Often has very little formal authority. They might be called a project coordinator or expediter. They spend a lot of time coordinating across departments, often without much power to command resources. It can be tough.
Okay, I can see that. What else?
Then you have matrix organizations. These are more complex. Team members report to both a functional manager, like their department head, and one or more project managers.
Multiple bosses. Sounds tricky.
It can be. Matrix structures can be strong, where the PM has more power, weak, where the functional manager has more power, similar to functional org, or balanced. Communication and role clarity are absolutely vital in a matrix.
And the opposite end of the spectrum.
That would be the projectized organization. Here, the organization is basically structured around projects. Team members are often assigned full-time to a project, report directly to the PM, and when the project ends, they move to another project. The PM usually has a great deal of authority and control.
So the PM is really the boss in that structure.
Pretty much. You also see other types mentioned, like organic or simple, often in very small orgs, virtual teams, and hybrid or composite structures that blend elements. Oh, and one clarification. The term tight matrix. That specifically refers to co-location, putting the team physically together. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a matrix organizational structure.
Ah, good distinction. Physical location versus reporting structure.
Okay.
And within this ecosystem, there's often a specific group called the Project Management Office, or PMO.
Yes, the PMO. Its main role is to standardize project-related governance processes and facilitate the sharing of resources, methodologies, tools, and techniques across the organization. They bring consistency.
So they support the projects.
They can, but their role varies. The notes describe three main forms. A supportive PMO acts like a consultant, providing templates, best practices, training, but has low control.
Okay.
A controlling PMO requires compliance. They demand that projects use specific frameworks or methodologies, templates, maybe go through gate reviews. They have moderate control.
Right, ensuring standards are met.
And then there's the directive PMO. This type takes control by actually managing the projects directly. The PMs might report into the PMO. They have high control.
So the PMO itself can be the project manager, in a way.
In the directive model, yes. PMOs can do lots of things. Training PMs, managing shared resources, developing methodologies, acting as a central archive, providing oversight, sometimes even making decisions like terminating projects if they're not aligned or performing. They can be a key stakeholder.
Okay, that clarifies the role of the PMO nicely. Now, let's track the project's journey itself. We mentioned phases, but there are also life cycles. The source distinguishes between the project life cycle and the product life cycle. How are they different?
That's a really important distinction. The project lifecycle is the series of phases a project goes through from its start to its finish. Think: initiating, planning, executing, closing. It's about managing the work to create the deliverable.
Okay, the work itself.
The product lifecycle is much broader. It covers the entire life of the product that the project might have created, from its conception and development through its introduction to the market, growth, maturity, and eventual decline and retirement. A single product could have many projects associated with it over its entire life cycle. They're independent but related concepts.
Got it. One product, potentially many projects over time, and within a single project's life cycle, there are different ways the work can actually be done, right? Different development approaches.
Exactly. The source calls these development life cycle models. The choice depends heavily on the project, the industry, the level of uncertainty.
What are the main types?
Well, there's predictive, which you might know as waterfall or plan-driven. Here, you try to define the scope, schedule, and cost upfront early in the project. Changes are generally discouraged. It works well when requirements are really well understood.
Okay, plan it all out first.
Then you have iterative models.
Mm-hmm.
Here, you repeat project phases, refining the product with each repetition or iteration. Your understanding evolves as you go.
So learning and refining in cycles.
Right, and incremental models are similar, but they focus on delivering completed, usable pieces of the product in each cycle, or increment, so the customer gets value sooner.
Delivering value bit by bit.
Yeah.
Makes sense. And then there's the one everyone talks about, Agile.
Right, which falls under the adaptive or change-driven category. These are designed for projects where there's high uncertainty or risk or requirements are expected to change a lot. You work in very short iterations, maybe 2-4 weeks. Work is pulled from a prioritized list called a product backlog. Stakeholders are involved constantly. The time and resources are often fixed for each iteration, but the scope can evolve.
And Scrum is a type of Agile.
Yes, Scrum is a very popular and effective Agile method or framework.
Okay. And can you mix these?
Absolutely. You can have a hybrid model that combines elements, maybe predictive for hardware development and adaptive for the software component. The key really is choosing an approach or combination that fits the work and allows enough flexibility to handle the inevitable changes.
Flexibility seems key. Now, regardless of the development model, you mentioned the overarching 5 project management process groups. What are those again?
Right, these are the high-level groupings of processes: initiating, planning, executing, monitoring and controlling, and closing.
And you said earlier they aren't strictly sequential.
Definitely not. That's a common misconception. They overlap and iterate throughout the project or even within a single phase. A PM needs to figure out which specific processes from each group are actually needed for their project. Again, it's about tailoring. You don't necessarily do every single defined process.
Okay, let's quickly walk through them. Initiating.
This is where you define the project at a high level, get it authorized, you figure out the purpose, align it with what stakeholders expect, the PM gets assigned, key stakeholders are identified, the project charter gets developed. You also look at high-level risks here. Interestingly, at the very start, your actual staffing and costs are low, but risk and the ability of stakeholders to influence the project are at their highest.
Okay, setting the stage. Then planning.
Planning. The notes emphasize this is arguably the most important group for the PM. About half of all the defined processes fall under planning. This is where you create the detailed roadmap, the project management plan, and all its subsidiary plans: scope plan, schedule plan, cost plan, etc. You figure out how you're going to do everything, you get approval for this plan, and often hold a formal kickoff meeting, and if major changes happen later, you'll likely revisit planning.
So planning is huge. What about executing?
This is where the bulk of the project's budget and effort usually gets spent. It's about doing the work defined in the plan. Coordinating people and resources, managing procurements and contracts, building and managing the team, doing quality assurance, managing communications and stakeholder engagement. It's the doing phase.
Where the plan becomes reality.
Mhm.
And monitoring and controlling.
This runs alongside executing. It's about tracking progress, comparing actual performance against the plan, identifying variances, managing changes, making sure only approved changes get implemented through integrated change control, taking corrective or preventive actions, managing risks, basically keeping the project on track.
Course correction.
Exactly. And finally, closing.
Wrapping things up.
Right. This isn't just stopping work. It involves formally finalizing all activities, getting final acceptance of the deliverable, closing out contracts, creating a final report, archiving all the project records, releasing the team, and very importantly, capturing lessons learned for future projects. This happens whether the project finished successfully or was terminated early.
That's a great overview of the flow. Now let's get into some more specific concepts. The PMBOK Key Guide organizes all this knowledge into 10 knowledge areas.
Yes. These are like the subject domains a PM needs to understand. They cover integration management, pulling it all together, scope, schedule, cost, quality, resource, communications, risk, procurement, and stakeholder management. All those 49 processes we mentioned earlier fit within one of these 10 areas.
Okay. And the source mentioned some changes in the latest editions of the PMBOK Guide. Adding or removing processes. Why is that significant?
Well, it shows the field isn't static, it evolves. For instance, adding processes like manage project knowledge highlights a growing emphasis on learning from projects. Adding implement risk responses puts more focus on proactively dealing with risks, not just identifying them. Removing close procurements and integrating it elsewhere might suggest streamlining. These changes often reflect shifts in industry best practices, maybe towards more agile or integrated approaches. PMI often emphasizes these new things, so practitioners need to stay current.
So the field is always learning and adapting too.
Constantly. And beyond processes, there are tools and techniques, ways to actually do the work, which are grouped for tailoring, like data gathering techniques, analysis techniques, decision-making tools, communication methods, and interpersonal skills.
Got it. Let's talk about a couple of specific documents or structures. The Requirement Traceability Matrix, RTM. What's that for?
The RTM is super useful. It's basically a grid that links each project requirement back to its origin, like a business need, and forward to the deliverables that satisfy it, and often the test cases used to verify it. It helps ensure that every requirement is actually addressed and helps manage scope creep.
So it connects the dots. And the Work Breakdown Structure, WBS.
The WBS is fundamental for planning. You take the major project deliverables and you decompose them, breaking them down into smaller, more manageable components called work packages. It creates a hierarchical view of all the work to be done. It's the foundation for estimating cost and schedule.
Breaking big things into small, manageable pieces.
Exactly. And then you need to know who does what. That's where something like a responsibility assignment matrix, RAM, comes in. A common type is the RCI matrix.
RCI, what does that stand for?
Responsible, accountable, consulted, informed. You list the work packages, from the WBS usually, and the team members or roles, and then you mark who does what for each task. Responsible is who does the work. Accountable is the one person ultimately answerable for it, and usually there's only one A per task. Consulted are those whose input is needed, and informed are those who just need to be kept up to date. It clarifies roles and avoids confusion.
Okay, clarity on who does what, very important. Let's shift gears slightly to data and money. How does project data flow?
There's a specific progression mentioned. You start with raw observations, work performance data. Things like, we spent 10 hours on this task, or this deliverable is 50% complete. Just the raw facts.
Okay, raw data, then what?
That raw data gets analyzed in context. That produces work performance information. So we're currently running 5% over budget, or based on current progress, we forecast finishing 2 weeks late. It's data plus context plus analysis.
Information, not just data.
Right. And then that information is compiled into work performance reports. These are the formatted reports you'd share with stakeholders, status reports, progress reports, forecasts presenting the information in a useful way for decision-making.
Data to information to reports.
Got it.
And financially, some key terms. Sunk costs.
Sunk costs. This is crucial. It's money that's already been spent and cannot be recovered. The key thing is, sunk costs should never be considered when making future decisions, like whether to continue or cancel a project. That money is gone anyway. You should only base decisions on future costs and benefits.
Don't throw good money after bad, basically.
Exactly. You also need to understand direct costs tied to the project versus indirect costs, overhead, fixed costs versus variable costs, and the law of diminishing returns.
Remind me of that one.
It's the idea that if you keep adding more of one input, like team members, while keeping others fixed, eventually the extra output you get from each additional unit of input will start to decrease. Adding the 10th person might add less value than adding the 3rd person did. There's a point of optimal efficiency.
Okay, more isn't always better. What about depreciation? That sounds like accounting, but why is it relevant here?
It might seem like accounting, but it can actually impact project decisions, especially around assets bought for the project. Depreciation is how the cost of an asset is spread over its useful life. Different methods affect cash flow and taxes differently.
How so?
Well, straight line is simple, same amount each year, but methods like double declining balance depreciate the asset much faster early on. This means bigger expense deductions sooner, which can lower taxes initially and improve early cash flow, potentially freeing up capital. Sum of the year's digits is another accelerated method, faster than straight line, but not as fast as double declining. Understanding these can influence make or buy decisions or investment justifications within a project context.
Interesting. So it connects to the project's financial health. What about measuring the value created? Economic value added, EVA.
EVA is a really neat metric. It tries to measure the true economic profit. It's the project's net operating profit after taxes minus a charge for the cost of all the capital invested, including opportunity costs.
Opportunity cost.
Yeah, what that capital could have earned elsewhere. The source gives an example. Project costs $100, first-year return is $5, but maybe that $100 could have earned 8% interest in a safe investment. The EVA would be $5 minus 108%, which is $8, actually $3. So even though it made $5, it actually destroyed economic value compared to the alternative. It's a tough measure.
Wow, okay. That really focuses on true value creation.
Exactly. And there are other financial metrics too, like net present value, NPV, which calculates the present value of future cash flows minus the initial investment, considering the time value of money. Positive NPV is generally good. Present value, PV, future value, FV, internal rate of return, IRR. These are all tools to assess a project's financial attractiveness.
Lots of financial tools. And quickly, the difference between a forecast, status, and progress report.
Simple distinction. Forecast predicts the future, example, estimated completion date cost. Status report describes where things are right now. Progress report summarizes what has been accomplished up to a certain point in time.
Okay, helpful clarification. Let's wrap up with something maybe less tangible, the psychology and practicalities. The source mentions the journey to Abilene, or Abilene's paradox. What on earth is that?
It's a fascinating concept about group dynamics and faulty decision-making. The paradox is when a group collectively decides on a course of action that none of the individuals in the group actually want to do.
How does that happen?
It happens because each person believes, incorrectly, that their own preferences are counter to the group's, and so they don't raise objections. They go along with what they think everyone else wants to avoid conflict or seem difficult. Everyone assumes everyone else is on board, when in reality, nobody is. They all end up taking a metaphorical trip to Abilene, even though nobody really wanted to go there.
Wow. So fear of speaking up leads to a collective decision nobody supports. I can see that happening on projects.
Oh, absolutely. It highlights the huge importance of creating psychological safety, where team members feel comfortable voicing concerns or dissenting opinions, even if they go against the perceived consensus. You need that open communication to avoid ending up in Abilene.
That's a powerful lesson.
Yeah.
Any final practical tips from the source?
A couple of good ones. If something unexpected happens, the first place to look for guidance is always the project management plan or the project charter. If the answer isn't there, then escalate and ask management. Don't just guess. And remember, unresolved issues always fester and lead to conflict later. Address them proactively.
Good advice. Plan first, then ask. Deal with issues. And the triple constraint.
Right, the final reminder. Never agree to a change in one constraint, like cutting the budget or shortening the schedule, without fully analyzing and getting agreement on the impact to the others, like scope or quality. It's a system. You can't change one part in isolation without consequences elsewhere. Always consider the trade-offs.
Fantastic. What an incredibly thorough deep dive today. We've really covered the map-defining project, the critical role of the PM, and that huge communication aspect, how the organization structure shapes things, the life cycles and process groups, key financial ideas, and even that Abilene paradox.
Yeah, it's a lot, but hopefully it gives you a much richer understanding. Whether you're actually managing projects at work, tackling your own personal initiatives, or just curious about how organizations get complex things done, these concepts are really fundamental.
Absolutely. It really illuminates that intricate dance. So here's something to think about as we wrap up. We've talked so much about tailoring processes and frameworks to fit the unique needs of each project, and we just touched on the dangers of groupthink, like the journey to Abilene. How might really internalizing these